I have significant, I have dreams, not in terms of what God wants me to do.
Yeah.
I don't have a direct channel. I think most of my dreams, or maybe it is, and I'm not seeing it. But most of my dreams are illuminating my greatest fears or my insecurities, or how I guess maybe my insecurities of not living up to what I see my role as. So it's more personalized in terms of self-awareness. I wish I did have dreams of God.
Well, if it's okay to ask, because I know, like, I know you're not like a Freudian psychoanalyst, right? But you do like have practiced in psychology, and I wonder like what the role of dreams in your practice has been, or if you have thoughts on, like, as people of faith, like what's the dream equivalent?
For me, I use the dreams to help as one piece of a puzzle of understanding someone and helping them understand themselves. There are a few universal symbols, but I don't do that. What is this symbol? What is this action? What is this person in your dream mean to you as a person? It's a very personalized approach to learning what the brain is trying to do and tell you, or it's throwing off stuff. It's sloughing off your worries and bringing it to your consciousness so that you can understand you better and be more understanding of yourself and more patient and caring of yourself. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I will say, it's interesting to think about how like there's some readers in Genesis that talk about how God goes from being very, very active, like physically in the garden, and then God increasingly steps back and now is doing this interplay with dreams. And it's not something that like we feel real comfortable with in like contemporary culture, talking about like, hey, I had this vision in my dreams. And again, part of that might be like because of like what Sigmund Freud did with it. I don't know. But like, I haven't gone to like a church seminar on like finding the call of God in your dreams, nor would I like be interested in that. Although here it is in the text.
And that was what spoke to me in chapter 8, was how we have to look at the context and the culture of the people in the stories, as well as the context and the culture and the thinking of the people who were later on who were interpreting these stories and writing them down. And then we have to look at our culture and our context as we now interpret not only the dreams, but the stories in the Bible. So it's all very personal. And that fits in with my thinking of dreams are so personal. We can't have one symbol to mean everything for everybody.
That's fair. I was never asked by a discernment committee when I was thinking about becoming an Episcopal priest, like, how has the call to ministry been made manifest in your dreams? And I probably, because I'm an Episcopalian and not a charismatic, if I'd said like I had this dream, people would probably been like, no, like stamp no. So it's just interesting to think through that, honestly, right? That we have like different ways of discernment now that we like prefer, and like depending who you read, like dreaming is like really controversial and strange.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I hope that was helpful. Sorry, I didn't mean to butt in so much, but again, I'm really interested in your perspective on this, not because I have strong visions and dreams, but because that's how the text unravels.
Oh, okay. I'm supposed to call on someone.
Even though I interrupted your sharing, yeah.
No, that's fine. Oh, is it time for me to call on someone?
If when you're ready, it is. I think.
Okay, I'm ready. Get the focus off of me. Ellen, how about you?
Oh,
Ellen?
you just turned mute on. There you go.
Can I interrupt just a second, Mike?
Oh, please. Yeah.
Herb is calling me and he doesn't have the link. Can
Yeah.
you, I don't know how to send it to him. Can you send it to him?
Yeah, I do. And Kay and Lila particularly, I'm going to put the link in the bottom of the e-news. Of course, the link never changes. It's the same every week.
Yeah.
But that can be inconvenient to try to look through. So you'll find it in the bottom of the e-news.
Is it in the bottom of this week's e-news?
It'll come out tomorrow.
Okay.
And I'll leave it there for good. I had pulled it because I thought, well, I don't know that anybody else wants to be joining this thing now that we started it. And that's silly. It'll be there. It'll be there from here on out.
Well,
I won't tell.
I saved it for me, but I don't know how to get onto my email when I'm on Zoom. I'm not very good at this stuff. So
Yeah. No, I emailed her the link just now.
Thank you.
And I'll text him to that effect.
Right. Sorry, Ellen.
Oh, that's all right. Speaking a little bit to what Darlene shared with us, made me think about what kind of dreams I have.
Yeah.
And currently, most of my dreams, I'm realizing, have to do with the fact that I'm struggling because I'm still trying to control things in my life. And that makes me think when I'm awake that I probably need to work on not trying to stay in control, that God probably has a better idea for my life than I do, which then makes me think about in the reading, I just am amazed at how awful people are in these stories. They fight, they cheat, they lie, they steal, and God is always there, and there's always a better way. And I don't know if they get these messages directly from God or if they finally just give up trying to fight and have their own way and realize that there's a better life and a better way. But there's always that outcome in the stories that we read in this chapter, where the breaches are so egregious, but then there's a solution and a resolution, even if it means separation. And then that separation becomes a really important thing in carrying on God's people, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I think
so. Jane.
I'm going to pass this time, and but I do have, on the subject of dreams, I rarely remember my dreams, and when I do, they've been lately very bizarre, strange. I don't know where they came from, and probably like Ellen, I'm trying too hard to control things. John.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, all. Now, since we're on the subject of dreams, I must admit I dream a lot. I remember them. They're themes in my dreams. I am absolutely certain everybody's had this one, and I have this theme a lot, and that's that I'm in a class that I'm going to a class I haven't been to, and I'm going to take a final exam, and I've not done any studies whatsoever. And if I don't pass the class, I'm not going to graduate. And that's it. I have that dream a lot.
Everybody has that dream.
I think they
If
do.
you've been to college, yeah.
not me, by the way. Never had that dream. My wife has it all the time.
But I have another theme, and that has to do with my work. I don't know whether I would call my dreams nightmares or not, because I don't wake up feeling particularly bad. But I do have a dream about being at work and planning to retire and all of many things that go along with that. So I can say this, and I have never, that I can remember, I've never had a dream where I dreamed about God. I don't know why, I just haven't. So that's about all I have to say at this point. And I'll pass it on to Lila.
Hi, John. Hello. So, devil's advocate here. Before I start, I have PTSD and I have nightmares regularly. So, but I also have some very comforting dreams of presence, and I think that's maybe the reason why I keep being willing to fall asleep every night, because maybe there'll be something good in my dream that night. So, devil's advocate, I think Joseph made up the dream about his dominance over his family. I'm just saying, I think he was just a spoiled brat being a little shit. Just saying, it's one of those unverifiable facts. And then his dream interpretation in the prison was really fortune telling. It was foretelling the future. This was not prophetic at all. It was, maybe he just had seen Pharaoh in action long enough. He knew what was likely to happen to these men. Like, if Tom Brady's playing that day, he's probably going to win. If the cook poisons somebody accidentally, he's probably not going to get his job back. So I'm just saying, I found it really more interesting that he was elevated to being second in command over there. Actually, and that this is the first really literary story we've got in terms of literary style that has a plot and an arc and some real continuity to it. The previous stories have felt like a real mashup to me of like somebody writing these down saying, oh, we've got all these tribes, we need to get them together, maybe let's just make them related. This is just me, I have no idea. So that captured my imagination and my interest that this is different, and this is probably written later. I don't know, Mike, maybe you could talk to us about that. And is this a story about how the Hebrews got to Egypt in the first place? Right? So that Moses could then save them later? He had to get them over there to get them back out. And the word Hebrew was used here to describe him, and I didn't remember that word being used before. And I don't know, is that maybe you can talk about that, Mike. So I'm very intrigued with this story. I've been looking forward to this chapter, and I really think patience, I'm not seeing it. I would like to see it in this story, but I'm seeing, this guy got thrown in a pit, sold for 20 shekels. Is that a lot of money? I don't know. I mean, was that like a prime guy, or was that like an undernourished child? I don't know. I get hung up on details. And then he's in prison in Egypt. And when you're in prison, you don't have a choice. You don't have a lot of choice there. So I'm not sure how to view patience during that time for him, other than he chose to be productive and be a leader in the prison, and evidently didn't get sadistic and abuse his position and turn angry and bitter. So I'm not sure. I may be focusing on a real rabbit hole there. And on this week, though, I love this story about Tamar and Judah because she's kind of a hero, like, to me anyway. I mean, and I'm noticing more and more women are going to be involved less and less. And I'm finding that's hurting me in a way it never has. So I'm seeing the comparison between Joseph's turning down Potiphar's wife, and I don't know that we ever get her name, actually. But she was part of the household economy, right? She wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, he would have been like stealing a cow or something if he had taken her up on her very kind offer. And then we've got Judah not keeping his promise about marrying his youngest son off to Tamar. And then, shopping for a good time at the city gate and giving up his signet ring. It just reminds me of Samson, this toxic masculinity. Sure, take my ring that you can sign contracts for me with. And then he doesn't get it back. I mean, yikes. A lot of trouble there. And the names of his sons who die, Mike, I'm just curious, in the Ruth and Naomi story, Naomi's sons are named like Sickly and Sicklier.
Yeah.
And these guys, and Onan, are they also named Weak and Weaker? So that was my overall feeling, is that we've got a story here, and I think it's just setting us up for what happens later. And it seems metaphorical to me. I mean, I don't think this is history yet. Okay, that's all. Tim.
Okay, a couple things I found interesting. Who was the man that had no name that Joseph stumbled upon to find his brothers? Was that God pointing the direction? Because if that man had not been there, Joseph would have gone back to his father and said, I can't find them. But instead, he found them and they put him into a pit. I found that was kind of an interesting little thing. And also the Tamar Judah thing, that was interesting because he's seen with the goat and the goat hair and everyone else he's seeing seems to stop with Tamara. And as far as I'm able to figure out, that's the line through which David and Solomon and Jesus goes. Is that correct, Mike? Yeah, so she seems to be the hero in this whole story here, because she, and as I've said before, I think although the women are a chattel, every time you need something strong to happen, like finding St. Moses in the river. It's always a female that seems to be right there to kind of show the way. So, Herb.
Thanks, Tim. I guess I have a couple of comments. One is how stories in the Genesis keep repeating themselves. And, I'm reminded of when Jacob puts on Esau's clothes and then goes to his father and cooks him a goat, only to deceive his father and get a blessing. And it's kind of repeated when Joseph's brothers take his coat, if you will, slay a goat, sprinkle it on the coat, only again to deceive their father, Jacob. So it's kind of interesting how these stories repeat sometimes in here. But there was a verse in Isaiah 40, at the very last couple of verses that I liked. And if I can, I just kind of read it for a moment. It says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." And I found that a very, very nice verse. And I think here is the Jews who returned to Judah are looking, I guess they're still in Babylon, but there's some hope that they can return soon from exile. So it was very nice. I enjoyed the reading of Isaiah 40. I came on late, so who hasn't been called? Raise your hand. Is everybody?
I think Amber and Kay, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I enjoyed listening to Darlene and everyone, but yesterday I went to a luncheon at Lott's, and the speaker was he was phenomenal, but he talked a lot about his time in prison and what his master plan, but his dream was when he got out. And listening to everybody talk today, we all have dreams when we're awake, and we interpret that God's speaking to us when something happens, and we go, "Oh, thank you, God," or "Thank you," or we're seeking for something, and all of a sudden something shows up, and we interpret that as a sign that God's answered our prayer or with us. So those are dreams when we're awake. And then we also, of course, have the dreams when we sleep. But could some of these dreams be when Joseph was awake, what he was hoping for, or what he thought he could, if it happened, he could interpret it or do something with it, gain something from it? So it just dawned on me after listening to that speaker talk about his hopes and dreams for when he got out. And I realized that I do a lot of dreaming and planning when I'm awake. So is it possible that some of these things that Joseph talked about, dreams, were actually hopes and plans when he was awake? Amber.
Well, I really appreciated everything that Lila talked about. And I don't know that I could add any more to a commentary on the story that she didn't touch. For me, I guess I was seeing kind of like a pattern of just suffering that's central to all of these stories, as in all great literature, because literature, exciting stories are based on suffering that's overcome and ends with some kind of hope. We like those kind of stories, so it makes sense that the Bible would be full of them. And while they're intended to give us hope, I think sometimes in our desire to be like patternistically like the characters in all of these stories, the people in all of these stories, we begin to we begin to kind of see parallels in our lives with just the suffering instead of the victory, so that we kind of walk in a sense of victimhood instead of the gratitude that we should have for God and the things in our lives. And I think that is a desire again to be like these people, especially like Christ, and sometimes can lead us into this immature place, myself included, of kind of denying other people's harsh truths, and things that they're going through, so that we can label ourselves victims in some way in which we're really not. And so I don't know, I guess just that pattern of suffering and how we identify with it and what the outcome of that identification is very interesting to me, and I think probably, for me at least, very critical to like maybe what it means to be an empathetic Christian, and just being mature in my faith and understanding of God. And you know, I mean, as someone who was raised very charismatic, you know, visions and dreams were given this this place of honor, and they were seen as very important, and like this direct channeling of God to you. And so I've always been a very, very, very vivid dreamer, and I remember my dreams, and they're quite intense, and they can be pretty wild. And so it was kind of something, you know, growing up that was special for me, and made me feel special, and also at times scared, depending on what I dreamed about. Because of course, sometimes I was told, oh, that's God talking to you, and sometimes I was told, you know, that's demonic influence upon you. And so it gets, you know, pretty sticky whenever you get into things like that. And of course, you know, a lot of charismatic people feel like it's a sign of the end times. So it's just really, I think, kind of like Darlene was saying, there's a maturity to, you know, what is an unrecognized piece of yourself versus what is God, you know, speaking to you through some kind of imagery or whatever. And I guess for me, I think maybe there's a really important difference in recognizing that we're unique and not special. Like every person is unique, but no person is really special, because to me, it kind of, when you start getting into like things like dreams that are viewed as gifts from God, and like you hear directly from God, you get into this weird thing of being grateful for God versus thinking like, oh, I'm special, so God saved me from a terrible circumstance. And that's rude and hurtful. So I don't know. I maybe this might be a little rambling, but to me, I just, as I was looking through this story, through these stories, and I saw a pattern of, you know, suffering and triumph, and of something like, you know, like the story, right, where he's kind of risen to a status above his family. That could have been a cautionary tale from God saying, hey, watch out for your egoism or terrible things will happen, you know, but it just, of course, you know, wasn't taken that way. So I hope that I will always, I don't know, be brave enough to be somewhat self-aware, because it's, you know, it can be painful and is actually really leaves you in peace. But anyway, that's it. Sorry. That was rambling, but.
Oh, I'm grateful for everybody's willingness to reflect on the story here. Graciela, did you want to take a turn?
Yes. It's interesting to listen to how people are reacting to the story. Dreams for me are just, I forget them. I don't have a memory about them. I feel like I dream, but it doesn't feel like bad dreams and just as an aside, I spent a night at the hospital on a sleep study, because this was just recently this week, because I'm forgetting things during the day, and the doctor is concerned that I'm not getting enough sleep at night or not sleeping very well. So I did this sleep study. Now I have not gotten the results. Tim was with me. It was a strange experience in that I was hooked up to a lot of wires and stuff that they were really tracking my heart and but that's just a medical thing. And it'll be interesting to me, of course, when I see the doctor, about what it is that they found in terms of what that has to, is there something related to my memory and remembering and sleep, the sleep pattern? I don't know. So that, I guess I got sidetracked in the story with that experience of it. So that's just my piece.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mike,
Yes,
have you done your talking?
I have not. I've not. So maybe one thing I can say is that like a thing I have not exactly done, but one of the professors at Emory now runs a Roman Catholic retreat center. And one of his ideas is that we often he has this like very lovely idea, which is that there's nothing wrong with being preoccupied. We often find ourselves preoccupied, as long as we're preoccupied with the same things that God is preoccupied with. And he sort of suggested that a lot of times we hear that verse, like, wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And often we don't realize kind of where our treasure or our heart is. So he suggests this approach that whenever you find your brain wandering, like probably right now while I'm talking, to not chide yourself, but just to jot down where it went. And then at the end of a month, just have a look about where your mind wandered to, and you will find yourself. Which I think is really interesting, because there's certain things I think about in dead time to like self-soothe, like to go to sleep. Quite often they have to do with like, what would I do if I won the lottery? Not because like I have some tremendous lack, but those things reveal to me like, where would I allocate resources, which is a way I think of thinking about goals, you know? And I rarely find myself before I go to sleep digging through like moments of deep gratitude for the day. That actually kind of wakes me up. It doesn't put me to sleep, which is an interesting thing to think about. So I would put that before you when we talk about dreams just a little bit, is like, where does our mind wander? That might fit really well. Like Lila said, I don't really know what the dreams mean. Did he make them up or whatever? And look, the text is real ambiguous about that. It is really clear that Joseph is like a diviner of dreams, but look, my daughter could tell you what the dreams meant. Like you don't have to be particularly wise to interpret these dreams, you know, like they're really darn simple, especially Pharaoh's, you know, like it's really weird. Like Pharaoh is just as a dummy. Like if he doesn't know what that dream means, God help him, right? That guy should not be running a country. So it's just sort of interesting to read that stuff. Like, oh, Joseph is so wise. No, like a 3-year-old could tell you what that means. And notice that Joseph inserts himself from like dream interpreter to what you should do. So is he patient or is he crafty? I don't know. He sort of does bide his time. I think we always assume one way in particular, but I invite you to consider as the story unfolds, to consider whether Joseph essentially hatches a plan of forgiveness or one of malice and vengeance that he in the end turns back on. We'll read that out next week. You know, there's some weird things to think through here. One of them I want to put before you is that Joseph is the one biblically who invents slavery. That sounds really weird, but consider how it works. Pharaoh holds all the food. So for people to get food in a famine, they have to give all their money. This is how Pharaoh owns all the money. This is how Pharaoh owns all the livestock. This is how Pharaoh acquires all the property. And this is how Joseph enslaves the Egyptians. So maybe it won't be such a big surprise that the Egyptians want to enslave Joseph's people in return. Sometimes we read the story and we're like, oh, whoever that Pharaoh is that enslaved the Egyptians, like what a meanie. But look, Joseph invents slavery. Now I know there's other slaves. Hagar is like a spoil of war, right? I get that, but I went to notice that like this imperial enslavement whereby Pharaoh owns everything, that comes to fruition in the Joseph story, and you might gloss over that. Herb, yeah, I think I see you ready.
So you're sort of differentiating between national and slavery of a whole nation and maybe individual slaves that people have.
This is a caste system.
Mm-hmm.
that's established that's institutionalized nationally. And some people view this as, many of you like learned about this in like high school or college or even elementary school. Once upon a time, there were these people called the Hyksos, and they came in and enslaved the Egyptians, and the Hyksos were Semitic people. And then like they were hanging out up in Lower Egypt, which is actually the northern part, right? And then the Egyptians like took their chariot technology and drove them out. And some people say, well, the Hyksos are the Hebrew people, or like that's the spinoff here. And what happened is like the natural born Egyptians overthrew the yoke of slavery the Hyksos imposed on them. I don't know if all that's right. Like nobody knows if the Hyksos are the Hebrews, but that is true. Like that's a story, according to archaeologists, that the Hyksos basically came in and enslaved the native Egyptians using their superior chariot technology. And when the Egyptians figured that out, they overthrew the yoke of slavery. But that resonates with, look who started the slavery.
That's interesting reading, and you probably historically you're probably correct. But when I read, the story of Joseph, it almost sounds like he's imposing a tax of 20% on their grains rather than enslaving them. But they may have, of course, they were used to build the pyramids and everything else too. So it's hard to maybe a period far before that, but I didn't quite read it that way.
And I didn't say it's the only reading, and it's very subtle. But I want to suggest to you, Joseph designs that system. And, basically what happens is he builds granaries, and then he uses those granaries to build imperial power. Seems like from the studies I've read that prior to Pharaoh sort of like owning all the land was both privately, but also owned quite a bit by priests, by like Egyptian priests. And so here's like an etiology. How did Pharaoh get to be like the sun? It may not be factual, but it does explain like a system. And I'm not saying that Joseph is like an evil guy. I just want to point out that within the text itself, Joseph is the one who enslaves the Egyptians, makes them indentured servants, if you don't like that word, slavery, but the people give their freedom up in order to eat, even though they grew the food. This is like the interesting thing, right? So this is a slow process whereby taxation creates imperial dominance. It is interesting to know, you'll see this bear out this well, that the Egyptians are clean-shaven people. In the Hebrews, you may know this is still true today if you're Orthodox, you must grow your hair in 5 places on your face. And so Joseph's had a beard for a long time, and the Egyptians find that detestable. So what do you know? He shaves to look like an Egyptian, and this is possibly why his brothers won't recognize him. They haven't seen him clean shaven since he was like 12. And his face has changed as an adult. The other thing you'll notice is that the Egyptians won't eat with him. I just want to forecast that out because he's like a nomadic sheep herder, and they find those people to be gross. That'll bear out in the text. The other thing you don't get to see in the text is as we continue to travel through Egypt, the text uses Egyptianisms, like it slips Egyptian words into the Hebrew text to literally transport the reader into Egypt. You can't see that in the translation. John, you got your hand up.
Yes. Back to something you said a moment ago. One of my thoughts is when you talked about why Pharaoh was able to control people, it seems to me that is a typical autocratic system. Yeah. And that in fact, even today, the autocrat who is controlling whatever, let's say, for instance, Russia or even China, they are the people who control the armies. And I think if you control the guns, you can control the people. And so I think that most autocratic systems can only function as long as they can control if you will, the power or the military power in their country or their system or whatever.
Fair. Yeah, and that we don't totally know, but again, it depends how we date this system. How do we date this story? And again, like chariot technology is pioneered, we think, by people like the Hyksos and the Hittites and the Egyptians. It comes to Canaan much later. And for what it's worth, chariots aren't like you think about in the movie Ben-Hur. They're not sturdy. Because remember, this is like, there's no iron. So there's no steel. These are like wooden wheeled things that horses pull around. And really all they are is archery platforms. You would never ride a chariot over somebody, nor apparently would you ride a chariot over a long distance, because you're going to break the wheels. There's not roads, right? So you're riding these wheels over like rocky ground. So like the way chariots work in battle is you don't hook them up until the battle starts. Like you don't get in your chariot and ride at 50 miles because it's just going to break into pieces. And the horse essentially runs away from the battle while the archer shoots people. Like that's that's sort of how that works. Just to put that in mind. We get iron chariots later, but even when you read the Philistines have iron chariots, that's like really weak iron. You don't think about a car mowing people over, and there's no war horses either. They haven't been bred to be like Clydesdales. All of that stuff we do is anachronistic reading into the text.
Mike, one more thing. What are we supposed to glean from all of this?
Well, that would be silly if I told you what you're supposed to glean from it.
Well, it's a discussion. How about having a discussion along those lines? Because I'm not sure what I'm supposed to get from this.
Well, okay, I want to introduce to you that when you think about Joseph's solution, it is helpful to that point we've talked about before, like how do we center ethical decision making? Joseph makes a decision that gives life to some people, but at the heavy expense of others. So this is a really good question when we think about national politics. And look, I'm just going to throw this out here because I don't actually want to get into the discussion of whether or not you believe that abortion should be a right or not. But I'm going to tell you, State Bill 8 is not a good policy because it singles out only small portions of the population and disproportionately punishes them for being involved in that process. So the cost is really high for women and healthcare providers, but look, it takes 2 people to make a baby. It takes 2. And when you incentivize turning doctors in, that's like a bounty hunter system. And is that really like the way we want to do? I mean, that's how witch hunts work, right? So I think you could be pro-life and still be very opposed to the heartbeat bill because of the mechanisms of enforcement. And I think the Joseph story invites that. Who are we enslaving? We see an issue that we're concerned about with survival of people, and how do we remedy that? I think the story also invites us to consider, what are our dreams? What are our dreams? Sometimes we don't even know them. And I think it's really helpful to think not just when we're sleeping, but like really, like where does our core keep returning? And what does that reveal about us? And how do we choose to be transformed? Or how do we double down in our dreams? And I think that's really important. Boy, this is a real dysfunctional family, and I'm in one of those, right? And so the question is like, by the way, all y'all are too. I think the question is like, not like, oh, everybody's dysfunctional. The question is like, are there lessons in here about how we can be more functional? And notice that like being the Lord over your brothers, I know a lot of brothers that like to pursue that dream, and look at the collateral damage that creates. I know all too well the collateral damage as a brother that creates in my life. To be honest, I've seen how parents can raise brothers to compete with one another on purpose, which I would suggest that's what Jacob does. So he gives Joseph a coat that either has long sleeves or many colors. Either way, he won't be working in that coat. That's very clear. And he blatantly shows favoritism. And I want to suggest to you that the brothers actually might have this really like linear scheme. Look, Joseph's getting a disproportionate share of dad's love and attention. So if he were gone, then we would get that love and attention. Of course, that plan boomerangs on them because dad's depressed after this. And it's a great reminder that like love is not a commodity that we can just like shift around. It doesn't work that way.
Mike, is that coat, was it symbolic in the time of this story being written? Was there something we've lost like that coat would symbolize? He was going to be a priest or going to be something that
Maybe. I just really think you should read it as this is a tuxedo with tails.
okay.
Right? And no shepherd does that because that will destroy the clothes. So when you wear those clothes, you don't work. Or color, like we just forget the color's like new and cheap, but color was like so expensive, right? That purple dye cost more than gold. You asked the question about a shekel, right? A shekel is like $8. So they sell him for $160. And you could choose to read that Judah is like doing a favor, or you could choose to read like, hey, not only do we get to get rid of our brother, but we also get some bucks out of this. I mean, he could be just a total worse for doing this. Reuben's trying to save his brother. And so like, hey, maybe Reuben's trying to redeem himself from having slept with his dad's concubine, but he didn't get to do that. I mean, it's helpful to read these stories. Like there's a lot tied up in these little tales, right? That story of Tamar every interpreter will tell you, like some people will try to figure out like, oh, this is not a discontinuity in the story. Yes, it is. I mean, well, like this story shows up in the middle of nowhere, right? It's weird. And it introduces, like it talks about the younger brother siring a child for the older brother. Well, you haven't heard about that yet. That shows up like from Mount Sinai when Moses gets the law. That hadn't happened yet. So this is like an anachronistic story of what's called Leviright marriage. And I just want to explain it to you because it's totally bizarre. The way that works is the firstborn son, carries the family name, period. So if he dies, the next born son is going to try to reproduce his brother. This is, again, you're going to say this is not possible. I know that, but that's how the story works. So what happens is the next born son takes the firstborn son's wife and produces a child, but the child will become the older brother. I know that can't happen, but that's what it does. So notice that Onan does not want to replace his older brother because his older brother will get all the inheritance. So what he does is like, he kind of goes through the motions, but makes sure there won't be an heir to supplant him. Onan might have his own wife already. And if there's no firstborn child to get 90% of the inheritance, the secondborn child gets the 90%. So if Onan successfully produces a child that will be his new older brother, he loses 80% of the inheritance that he was poised to receive. So you can see why he's loath to do this, right? And he's not killed because he masturbates. That's ridiculous. He's killed by God because he violates the Leviright marriage. Like he takes advantage of this woman without producing the heir he's supposed to produce. I mean, essentially, he uses her as a prostitute, which is not what he's supposed to do. So a lot of Victorians said, look, this is against like masturbation, and some like of our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters have read this as like sperm is magical and cannot be wasted. But look, the story's not about that. You can still believe those things. This is not, that story's not about that.
Stuff being mixed into it.
Of course, at the time too, there's been this switch where like sperm is like little people, and it's all about what the male does, and the womb is just where the little person grows. So it all comes from the man. It's like one of these beliefs that shows up. So see, then you're like, anyway. This is important to remember. Now notice that Judah is going to have sex with a prostitute at a shrine. I don't know if you noticed that. There's no commentary like he shouldn't be doing that. He's just going to go do that. And Tamar dresses up like a shrine prostitute. And reminder, you can read this in James Nichner's book, The Source. This is happening all throughout Canaan. The goal is like instead of going and singing a hymn on the organ, like you go to church and have sex with the temple prostitute. And that encourages the gods to have sex in heaven, which is where rain comes from, which is like Baal's sperm being poured out on the earth so that it will grow crops. I just compactly told you why people were loath to give up Canaanite religion. Because not only was like sex okay, like it was like the equivalent of a hymn sing. And Judah uncritically is going to do this. Now, notice what Tamar does. She's a piece of chattel. She's not being treated right by her father-in-law or other kids. So she takes the law into her own hands so that she can produce another child and actually carry Judah's name forward. But it's weird, like I'm really loath to say, hey, Emery, here's a story for you to emulate when you grow up. Be like Tamar. However, right, when women are chattels, they use their bodies to survive. And in this case, survival benefits Judah's name being passed on. And it's a very realistic story. Right? If you read Bridges on Poverty together, like this is what people in the bottom tier do. They use their bodies to get commodities because if they don't, they'll starve.
Mike?
Yeah.
Isn't she kind of the heroine here?
I mean, she is. And yet, like, I would not want my wife doing that or my daughter. Right? So it's a very like contextual heroine. In some ways, she's like an anti-heroine who becomes a heroine.
But she also puts a stop to all the deceit that has been going on before, because it doesn't reoccur again.
Well, maybe, but I would guarantee you Judah goes back to pagan shrines and has sex with prostitutes.
Right.
So
Yeah.
This should be a red flag. Anytime people talk about the sanctity of marriage in the Bible, that's just a bunch of bullshit. You just need to know that. Marriage is a contract in which a man slept with a woman and had to pay her father for having damaged the property. Now, there are some lovely reads the rabbis give us, right? Like when a man and a woman are naked and unashamed, that's when they come back to like, that's what marriage is meant to be. But like there's no marital ethic in the Bible like we have now, because women were absolutely on a different tier of personhood. So if you're looking for like a biblical view of marriage, you just have to pay for the goods you damage. Now, the church does not honor marriage that way, and I'm glad. And the reason we're able to do that is because times have changed. Some. But this is why I will never say at a wedding that I celebrate, who has come forward to give this girl away? I refuse to say that. I say who's come forward to bless the marriage. But see, giving away implies ownership, and that is very biblical. It's just wrong. And this is one of those weird stories. Luke is the gospel that talks about women a lot, but women don't show up in Luke's genealogy. Curiously enough, the women show up in Matthew's genealogy, which has very little in the gospel about women. And the heroines are Rahab the prostitute, Tamar the prostitute, Ruth, who acts like a prostitute. They're women who use their sexuality ultimately to replace their lost lineage husband people. I mean, this is like, if you're looking for a doctrine of resurrection in the Hebrew Bible, this is as close as it gets. A widow has a baby who will be her new husband. This does not make sense to us because we just don't do that stuff. And look, if you read Ruth, Ruth has a baby and she has it on Naomi's knees as if Naomi had it. And Naomi puts the baby at her own breast. Well, she's like 80. There isn't anything coming out of there. But Naomi treats it like her son because that's what it is. Ruth is never going to marry her son. Ruth's son, though, is now Naomi's firstborn. I hope that's strange to you. Because it's just weird. It's weird. I want you to know that actually Henry VIII married his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon. His brother Arthur was meant to be the king. And Arthur got sick and had never consummated the marriage with Catherine. So Henry VIII asked the Pope, I want to marry my brother's widow to produce a child who will be Arthur. And he wrote a special thing and the Pope gave him a dispensation to do that. As many of you know the story, Catherine only gave birth to a girl. She had several bizarre miscarriages where like the babies, like they looked like demonic, like there was a lot wrong with them. They had several congenital birth defects. And Henry, you can argue, thought maybe he did the wrong thing after all. And so he sought the annulment, not just because she wasn't having a son, because Henry thought he was doing the wrong thing. He thought he was supposed to do Leviright marriage. And then there were these bizarre stillbirths. And so he like repented. It's a compassionate read of Henry VIII. But you can read the history. He asked for a papal dispensation to marry Catherine based on Leviright marriage. All that matters, right? Because he started the Episcopal Church ultimately. You may be interested to know, it's tough like with Mrs. Podiphar, and absolutely, she's unnamed. A lot of people say Podiphar is a eunuch, which would mean not like he had no testicles, it would mean he was like fully emasculated, but he was in this position of authority with a wife as a status symbol, and Mrs. Podiphar could not produce him any offspring. So perhaps she's taking matters into her own hands with Joseph to produce a child for Podiphar. You could read her as this woman burning with passion, which is the typical male read, which chastises women, right, for essentially a male problem. Or you could say culturally her duty as wife is to produce an heir, and Podiphar can't do it. So how is she going to produce an heir for him, which is her principal duty in life? Joseph runs away and leaves his loincloth behind. Why is he walking around in a loincloth? A loincloth is not boxer shorts, it's a nail apron. It's a string with a piece of cloth in the front. So why is he walking around in that? I mean, he's the chief steward of the house. It's not like the chief steward of the house is walking around in a thong all the time to show he's the chief steward. Like, he's got real responsibilities. So I think it's okay to be a little dubious about Joseph. I just want to be real. What he ultimately says is, look, your husband has put me in charge over all his stuff, and you're part of his stuff. So I shouldn't mess with his stuff. Okay, but why are you walking around in a thong? I mean, like, it's a weird story.
Maybe he was just hot and it was comfortable.
Yeah, and I think when we read, oh yeah, you mean temperature hot? I always
Mhm.
thought you were saying like maybe he was just a hot man. But
He could have been a hottie.
yeah, but that blames the woman. So I'm gonna resist that. Right. Again.
Let's go with it's hot in Egypt all the time.
Yeah, it's not that bad actually next to the Nile. Now, I
But-
can tell you this, having been to Egypt, you don't want to live where there's not the Nile. And no one does because it's awful. You can ride a train down the Nile, and to your left is the Nile and a green belt, and to your right is sand. So you don't want to be in the sand. You you don't want to be over there in the Nile. That's where you want to be. Herd did mention this thing about the goat skins, and look, like the Bible doesn't believe in karma, but it is interesting to see that what goes around comes down eventually, and we know that to be true. And sometimes I think you hear the proverb, the parents eat the sour grapes and their children's teeth are set on edge. And we could read that like God does that, but look, we do that. If you drink while you're pregnant, your kids get fetal alcohol syndrome, not you. So it is often true, right, that what we do affects our kids, especially when they don't deserve it. And look, when you go around lying and cheating and showing favoritism, that is probably going to come back around to you. I mean, that seems fair. Lila, the remark, the sin against God, Genesis 39, 39. Is this about Onan again? No.
I'm pulling up my,
39.
sorry. 39:9. It's,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
It's
no,
the sin against God. Didn't that come out of Mosaic law? I mean,
yeah,
that's my question.
Yeah, it does. But please notice that there's a whole lot of Mosaic law anachronistically inserted into this text, including Leviright marriage.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's just confusing.
Well, this is like why we have to remember, like we're hearing like morals and scruples and laws before they've happened, and they've been retrojected into the story. And that's because, right, the way these stories are told is as a lump together. So it's okay when you're writing a story that the rule comes later and you've seen how to uphold the rule contextually before you get the rule.
And we do that. We do that regularly.
All the time.
It's hard not to do that. I heard a YouTube earlier this morning about how this story, Joseph's story, was also always actually it was all about Jesus, and I thought, oh no, and that's too weird.
It is really weird. And it's good to remember, and we'll see this as we go on, right? Jesus is the fulfillment of the story. Like he resonates with the story, but the story is not like predicting him exactly. And that's like a big Christian fallacy.
I don't like reading it like that. I think it's not, for me, it's not helpful. Because Jesus was a Jew and he wasn't reading it like that.
Right.
And so, that's all.
I do hope you picked up on this line in Psalm 25. I just want to name it. I happen to really, really love this line. And I think it is like something we can easily gloss over, right? Don't remember me, God, from the sins I've committed, but remember me in your unfailing love. Don't remember me because I'm bad.
That's
remember
nice.
me because you're good. It's really lovely, isn't it? I was actually doing a sacrament with somebody yesterday that's reconciliation, and the way that showed up, right, is it's not your faith in the sacrament that makes it work, it's God's faith in you. Because it's when it's our faith, we can get it wrong and we can botch it and we don't get the grace. And that isn't how sacraments work. It's God's faith in you, regardless of your faith in the thing.
Can I challenge you on something?
Yeah, you
earlier?
absolutely, please.
This concept that the Podiphar was a eunuch, Okay, is a reading between the lines, obviously, and but it describes him as the captain of the palace guards, I guess, or the captain of the guard, which is not typically somebody you would think of as a eunuch. I mean, do you embed that story just to soften what his wife has done?
No,
I mean, is that?
Yeah, it's great. A lot of scholars read him as a eunuch because like it's good to know eunuchs guarded harems only after the Islamic conquest. Eunuchs were used actually as fighters because since they had no children, their total allegiance was to their sovereign. So like eunuchs were around before Islam. Muslims inherited them and thought, what do we do with these people? And often like captains of guards or stewards were eunuchs because there was no benefit for them in cheating the person who they served because there was nothing to pass on. It is conjecture, Herb. It's conjecture. And it may be wrong. I mean, look, Podiphar could have not been a eunuch. I'm trying to remember though why the case is made, and I've like slept since I read all this stuff, but most interpreters do consider him to be a eunuch. I owe you more than that, so I'll see if I can remember where that is.
Okay. Why? And also, this story is embedded in the middle of the Joseph story. What's the point of that?
It depends who you read. I mean, a lot of people will say it's like some kind of interruption, or it's like, look, Joseph has gone off to Egypt, and so now here's what's happening while he's in Egypt. And it is trying to explain a little bit how Judah becomes the primary tribe. It's going to become primary because the other 10 get wiped off the face of the earth, right? So like, how does that succession work out? And it is one of those stories, like you say, that repeats throughout the Torah, right? I mean, Ruth's not in the Torah, but Rahab is, where these women like take matters into their own hand to secure succession ultimately for men. So that does happen repeatedly when we read the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, it just sort of sounds like an interlude right in the middle of the story. And maybe like you say, they're just giving passing of, it denotes passing of time. Yeah. So they tell a story, another story in between or something.
It's real possible. It's just hard to know definitively because we can't ask the editor, why'd you do it? Yeah. But I will tell you, there are commentators that'll say, no, it's not a distraction, like it carries the story along. I just think from a literary standpoint that I don't agree with it. It feels like it breaks the story. Lila?
From a literary standpoint, it gives us the comparison between Judah and Joseph. Joseph rejects Mrs. Podiphar. We can give him the benefit. I mean, at least he's behaving better. Judah is not behaving well at all. He's going to the Canaanite shrines, and who knows what else he's doing that didn't make the book.
I mean, maybe, but I do want to raise that there's like some real thought. How does Mrs. Podiphar get his loincloth? Does she reach up under his tunic? I mean, like, I just want to take that seriously because it's like suspicious to me. I wasn't suspicious about it last time I read it, but this time I'm like, why? People just didn't walk around in loincloths. They did not. So I don't know the answer.
Well,
sometimes,
Mike, if you don't take it literally, what could it mean?
Well, I mean, I'm going to leave that up to. I'm going to leave that to you.
No, but I'm talking. So the people wrote this, and it was accepted into the books called the Bible.
Yeah.
And so there had to be some reason that they put that in there, other than the literal reason. Maybe not, but
So maybe this is a story to be followed, right? Like, keep your loincloth on. Like when the opportunity for somebody, look, and marriage is really clear. The woman belongs to another person, so don't mess with his stuff. That's really clear. So here's a story like, you can mess with the stuff when you're in charge of it, but you can't mess with that piece of property. So maybe that's an emulable story. I don't know.
So Mike, are you suggesting that maybe Joseph was guilty of the adultery? Just for clarity for me.
I'm not making a suggestion of adultery. I'm wondering why he's walking around in such a way that she can get his loincloth from him. I don't know what that means.
Okay.
But like I say, when you're wearing a tunic, it seems hard to get somebody's loincloth and for them to be running around naked. That seems hard. And hey, maybe Joseph does flirt with a lady and then decides not to. Like that's possible.
He could join the Me Too movement.
Poor privileged man. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I guess it could.
So I just want to, I think this story is reading me, Mike. So I'm hesitant to speak, but I just want to say, I think Tamar is a hero, Shiro, because she's, in her culture, she has no agency. We're lucky to have her name. She's in a real dead end as a widow. She has no rights. And yet she takes initiative and she exercises the power that she does have towards survival for herself.
Yeah.
So I think if I was having to tell this story to a young girl, I think I might choose to spin it that way. Kind of like Esther.
Yeah. Which shows up on Sunday, by the way.
Oh.
The last thing I'm going to say, because I've got a hard stop and I have to go, but I do, there is another Tamar in the Bible. It's David's daughter, and David's son Amnon rapes her without paying for her. So he ruins her. And so maybe this is a story of two Tamars. And that's worth considering. We'll do chapter 8 next week. Thank you for your time. And I'm sorry I got to go, but I have an internment I've got to do. Let's come back and talk more Joseph next week, because we'll finish Genesis next week and we'll have the whole Joseph cycle before us.